There we go. There we go. Hope everyone at home is up and ready, good to go. Okay. So we're going to do some labeling today, but I just want to go over some of the anatomical features of the spinal cord here. One, like I said before in lecture, kind of keep in mind where it's located. It's located in between the periphery of the body, okay, and the brain. It's part of the central nervous system, okay, and it's going to be located just inferior to the medulla oblongata, okay. So there's 4 parts, and you want to make note of all of these 4 parts because it's much easier. Well, you have to know it anyways when we do the labeling here. All right. So the 4 parts of the spinal cord include the neck, which is the cervical region, your mid or upper back, which is the thoracic region, the lumbar region, easy to remember because they both start with L, and that's low back, lumbar. And then finally, your sacral area. Remember the sacral bone, that portion that sits right in between 2 hip bones there, the 2 os coxa. So the 4 regions of the spinal cord, all right, are going to be located close to where you would kind of see them in the vertebral column, except when we get towards the inferior portion. The lumbar and the sacral region are going to be a little bit different, okay? I'll explain to what I mean by that. But the spinal cord proper, the actual cord portion, all right, tapers off and ends at a point. It's called the conus medullaris, and that ends at actually the L1 vertebrae. It's important. You know that, especially if we're going to be doing spinal taps, if you're going to get an epidural, okay, if they are going to inject some medicine into you, you need to know where the actual spinal cord ends, and then from that point, the spinal nerves just kind of dangle off like these cords hanging down. And when they were labeling things, they referred to that area where all those spinal nerves are dangling down as a cauda equina, which stands for horse's tail, okay? Because that's what it reminded those folks of, all right? So there's 2 portions of your spinal cord in which we see enlargements that are occurring, and that has to do with the number of neurons, the cells there, that are coming off of the spinal cord. And that's going to be found in the cervical region in your neck, and then the lumbar region, all right, of your spinal cord, because it's these 2 regions that are going to give off neurons that are eventually going to form nerves that are going to innervate the upper limbs from the cervical part, and then from the lumbar part, that's going to innervate your lower limbs. Okay? So you'll see these kind of 2 bulges in the spinal cord, right, in those regions, and that just has to do with just the large number of neurons that are coming off of the spinal cord. All right, so if we take a peek here, zoom in a little bit. All right, so here you can see, all right, here's the medulla oblongata up here, all right, and the cervical region of your spinal cord kind of matches up with the cervical vertebrae, all right, and then as we move inferiorly, the thoracic region of your spinal cord, and that's pretty much similar too. It's gonna remain in the thoracic region of your vertebrae, right, and that kind of ends around T11. Right, and then your lumbar region is very small. In the sacral region, you can see how small that is. Right, that's this little part right down here. Okay, your lumbar and your sacral portion of your spinal cord. But all this stuff down here that's found in your lumbar spine, right, that is just these strings that just hang down. And we call those the rootlets there. And that's what we refer to as the cauda equina. Again, it looks like just all these strands just kind of hanging down here. Right? And you can see over here, this little tip here, that's the cauda equina, or excuse me, this is the cauda equina, this is the conus medullaris, this little tip here. So when they want to give you an epidural, right, what they'll do is they'll palpate out your iliac crests here. And that's going to be found around between L4 and L5. And then usually what they'll do is they'll insert the needle right in this area here. because you don't. If you insert it here, you could pierce the spinal cord, and that's a whole mess of problems. That's not good, right? Down here, where the cauda equina is, as you're inserting, you have these, these fronds hanging down. As you're inserting the needle, right, nice and easy, you can, even though one of them might be in the way, they'll just slide off to the side. So you just kind of, those little rootlets just kind of drift off to the side so they can actually insert the needle to give the medication. All right. Okay, quick review. I'm from the Caribbean. I don't recognize daylight savings. That was one of the things when I was living down there in the Caribbean on the island of the Commonwealth of Dominica. We didn't observe daylight savings. It was kind of nice. Just don't like that it gets so dark early. So I guess your answer to that, Anna, is no. I'm sorry. You don't. Okay. What's today? Thursday? Oh, Anna, just tell me the truth. You really want to watch Green Bay Packers play Thursday Night Football? That's what you want to do. I see right through you. Not Tampa Bay. Do not know. Off the top of my head, I knew, but see, I can't access that long-term memory. I keep, never made it past the short-term memory. I want to sleep. I hear you. All right. Let's go. Okay. So just to kind of remind you, okay, a bundle of axons. The peripheral nervous system is a nerve, right? I won't review the coverings because I'm sure you know those already because you folks have been studying, all right, like crazy. Right? But we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves, right? So when we're talking about a specific spinal nerve, we're going to assign a letter to it and a number, right, depending on what part of the spinal cord it comes off of. So if it comes off of the cervical spinal cord, we assign the letter C to it, okay? And there's 8 spinal nerves that come off the cervical, so it would be C1 through 8, okay? For the thoracic, same thing. We would assign a T to it, and that would be there's 11. Excuse me, not 11. There's 12 of those, so it would be 1 through 12. And then for the lumbar, okay, there's 5, so it would be 1 through 5, okay? So that gives us 6 remaining, okay? And in the remaining ones, we have the sacral. Believe it or not, we have coccygeal, okay? I can't spell that. Sorry, guys. I'm not even going to try. Not even going to try. I apologize. Can't get better mouths. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the parts for the spinal nerve, because this is going to be really important, especially when we're going to be doing the lecture material. And as I go through this, hopefully it'll help you to understand, right, what I'm discussing when we're doing the pathways. First of all, we're talking about a spinal nerve. You need to know that they're mixed nerves, okay? Which means they have both sensory and motor neurons in each nerve, all right? So when we're dealing with the spinal anatomy here, okay, we're going to see, just go to the picture here. Okay, here's your spinal nerve. Now, what contributes to the spinal nerve, right, are going to be the anterior rootlets here, are also known as the ventral rootlets, right? And those are all motor neurons, okay? So that's going to be coming out of the spinal cord and going into the spinal nerve. And then this posterior rootlets, those are all sensory neurons. So that's going to be carrying sensory information up into the spinal cord, okay? So where they're together here, that's the spinal nerve. When it divides, those are going to be your rootlets. Now, if you notice, all right, on our posterior component, you've got this little bulge here. Okay? That's referred to as the posterior root ganglion, also known as the dorsal root ganglion. All right? So that's where, remember what a ganglion is. It's a cluster of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. Remember I was telling you those sensory neurons bipolar neurons. Right, so all the cell bodies to these sensory neurons are going to be found in the posterior root ganglion. Okay, so this is representing a sensory axon, which is coming from the periphery and going up into the spinal cord. And this red guy here, that's representing the motor axon that's exiting the spinal cord and going out to an effector organ. Okay, when we're talking about the different types of receptors, right, for the sensory portion, we have both the somatic, which we talked about in lecture, and the visceral. Think of visceral having to do with the viscera, the organs, okay? And somatic, that's going to be the conscious perception stuff, tactile, proprioception, sight, sound, all that stuff, right? And effectors, we have two types. You have visceral, or what we call autonomic, somatic. Somatic's easy. That's just skeletal muscle. And then visceral is going to be everything else. So that's going to be cardiac muscle, it's going to be smooth muscle, and glands. Okay? Keep that in mind. You need to know that. All right? All right, so that's what this page is kind of discussing the anatomy here when we're talking about the posterior root. The posterior root is going to contain only sensory neurons. It's also going to contain the posterior root ganglion, which is going to be the cell bodies for all those sensory neurons. Anterior root, motor neurons only. Okay? Where they both meet up, that's where we get our spinal nerve. You guys feel pretty good about that? Not too bad? Okay. Okay. So a couple of the things when we're talking about the spinal cord, all right, believe it or not, because it is part of the central nervous system, it's a very crucial organ. So it needs to have plenty of protection. The main protection for the spinal cord, all right, is 8. What's 8? Oh, it's 8. Oh, all right, good night. We can sing you a lullaby, or you might want me to do this. All by myself without nobody. The sun is beating down on my baseball hat. The air is getting hot. The brew is getting flat. Come on. All right, maybe you guys didn't want to. Because that's one of the few that I've actually memorized when I was a kid. Okay. Aw, see, I told you it would work. Okay. So, some of the things that do protect, it is that's right, it is. But I'm assuming everybody's taking the test. No? Look at you, you're here with me. You decided to spend time with me. I love it. And you haven't taken it either? See? You haven't either? Okay. Thank you for being here with me. I love this.
Tuesday night, so we can kind of like do that instead at the same time.
I'm going to get emotional. I'm going to start. You know what?
I'm not going to lie.
You guys are going to make me cry. I'm going to get a little bit verklempt. All right, so back to the protection here of the spinal cord. Obviously, the vertebrae, the bone, okay, hard outer casing. All right, we talked about the meninges, your last chapter. All right, the pia mater, the dura mater, and then the arachnoid mater, and then of course our cerebral spinal fluid. So all of those are actually there to help to protect the spinal cord. Okay, so in the vertebral column, that's what the spinal cord kind of is living in, right? You have the vertebral canal, right, which is made up of all those vertebral foramen. So when we stack all those vertebrae on top of one another, all those vertebral foramen, right, form the vertebral canal. Okay? So the spinal cord gives off its spinal nerves laterally. And when they exit out from your vertebral column, they exit out through those intervertebral foramen. Right, that's going to be found on the side. So that's what this is kind of showing you here. Right, here's the vertebral canal, right, this big hole here, right, and then the intervertebral foramen are here on the side. All right. All right. Quick review of the meninges. The innermost layer is the pia mater. That's the soft mother, right? That's made up of that loose connective tissue. And this is the part that directly clings onto, right, the spinal cord. Right, the elastic and the collagen fibers. we didn't talk about the denticulate ligaments. These are these ligaments that are actually going to help to support and hoist up the spinal cord laterally. They're on the side. I'll show you a picture here in a second. But they're on the side of the spinal cord here. Okay? And then way at the bottom of the spinal cord, where the Conus Medullaris is, it forms that cone, you've got one long, thin strand, right? And that's called the filum terminale, right? And that's this strand of the pia mater that will anchor the spinal cord to your tailbone, plexus. So it's not swinging around in the spinal canal there, right? So it helps to anchor it there, okay? Right, the second layer is the arachnoid mater. That's the spidery mother, web-like, hence arachnoid, okay? And this is important. This is where you find that subarachnoid space. That is where the cerebral spinal fluid is located. That is where when you get a spinal tap, that's where they go. Right? They insert the needle into the subarachnoid space there. Okay? And then you have the arachnoid trabeculae. Those are that tissue there, all right, that extends from the arachnoid mater to the pia mater. And finally, the hard mother, okay, the dura mater, that's the outermost layer. That's made up of that dense irregular connective tissue, all right? And so there's two spaces associated with the dura mater, all right? You've got the subdural space and the epidural space. The epidural space is outside the dura mater, all right, but it's just beneath the vertebrae, all right? And then the subdural space is the potential space down in between, right, the arachnoid mater and the dura mater, okay? All right, so here's the transverse view. Okay, so you can see here's the spinal cord. All right, so here you got your spinal cord. Here's the pia mater, right, directly on the outside. All right, here's one of those denticulate ligaments, these little ligaments that are on the side here, and they help to suspend the spinal cord, all right, in the middle of the vertebral canal here. All right, but if you notice, right, this outermost layer, that right there is the dura mater. You notice that the spinal cord is surrounded by adipose tissue. That's epidural fat right there. It sits right outside the dura mater. It's not like it's empty space in here. Okay? You got adipose tissue, which is fulfilling one of its functions is for cushioning, right, and that cushioning protection. And then, of course, we know that adipose tissue is loose connective tissue, so it's going to be loaded, right, with blood vessels. Right? So we have all these different blood vessels found in through here. Okay? So then you can barely see the arachnoid mater here. That's right here. So this is the subarachnoid space. That's where your cerebral spinal fluid is going to be located. And then you got your dura mater right here. There's a little tiny space in between the arachnoid mater and the dura mater. That's supposed to represent the subdural space. Okay? I like this view here because it shows you layer by layer. Okay, so if we go internal, all right, you can see here's the pia mater. It's directly adhering onto the spinal cord. Right? Then we're loaded with some blood vessels. Then the arachnoid mater, that's the middle layer, okay, surrounding this region. Then the dura mater is the outermost layer. You can see everything that it covers here. All right. This will help you a little bit with some of the locations of that white, the white and the gray matter. I want to start off with the gray matter. Okay? The gray matter, when we're talking about the spinal cord, that's that horrible H structure that I was drawing for you. Okay? So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail. That's all that I'm kind of filling in here. So remember, we already know what makes up gray matter. Okay? Non or unmyelinated axons, cell bodies and dendrites, glial cells, all right? And what am I missing? Nothing. All right. I just had to check myself. I was like, wait, am I missing something? All right. So cell bodies, dendrites, unmyelinated axons, and glial cells. That's going to be all in this gray matter here. Okay? So our gray H has three parts to it. And I kind of went over it with you, but let me be a little bit more in detail here. Okay? So the posterior horn is going to be this region back here. Okay? And that's going to be sensory neurons. Okay, we'll also see the interneurons. Remember, interneurons make up more than 50%, right, of the cells or of the neurons in your central nervous system. Okay? The posterior horns are going to have the axons of all those sensory neurons that we were talking about, but also the cell bodies of those interneurons. Then we have the anterior horn right up here in the front. Okay? And that is going to be, this is very important that you know this. All right, the cell bodies of the somatic motor neuron. Somatic means we have voluntary control over those neurons. So that means that those neurons are going to innervate what type of tissue specifically? What's the only type of motor tissue that we can control voluntarily wise? Skeletal muscle. All right? So the anterior horn contains, all right, the cell bodies of somatic motor neurons. And those somatic motor neurons are going to innervate skeletal muscle. In the lateral horn, I'm actually going to show you the picture. It's just horrible. All right? The lateral horn is going to be located over here. Okay? Oh, that's actually correct. I'll show you about that right here. Right. Here's the lateral horn. That's the horn. This is the posterior horn. This is the anterior horn. Okay? All right, so the lateral horn is going to control, excuse me, where am I? There you go. All right, the lateral horn is going to contain the cell bodies of autonomic motor neurons. That means, all right, that it controls cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Okay? So the neurons that leave that region of the spinal cord are going to innervate cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glandular tissue. Important that you know this. These lateral horns are only present, right, in the spinal cord from T1 to L2. Great test question. You need to know that. We'll revisit that concept later. All right, when we talk about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, so the right side of your spinal cord needs to communicate to the left side of your spinal cord. So we have commissural fibers, right, and we call that the gray commissure. Right, that's the actual H area there. So, you know, that goofy looking H that I draw, right? So where it crosses from one side of the spinal cord to the other, right here in this center region here, all right, that is the gray commissure, and there's a little hole in the middle. That's the central canal. And that's where you have ependymal cells that are in there, and cerebral spinal fluid flows down. Because remember when we were talking about the ventricles in the brain, the left and right lateral ventricles, third ventricle, fourth ventricle. Well, the fourth ventricle drains into the central canal, and the central canal goes the entire length of the spinal cord. Okay? Again, gray matter could contain unmyelinated axons, because remember, this is one of those areas where we see decussation. You get the crossing over of axons there. Okay? So those will be unmyelinated axons will be found in the gray commissure. All right, so cell bodies. We're still in the central nervous system. So a cluster of cell bodies we refer to as a nuclei. Okay? So we have sensory and motor nuclei. Okay? As we have somatic and visceral sensory, and we have somatic and autonomic motor. Right? So the sensory nuclei are again going to be found in the posterior horn. Right? Motor nuclei are going to be found in both the anterior horn and the lateral horn. Okay, so somatic sensory nuclei, you guys should remember this from lecture, it's going to receive information from your skin, your muscles, and your joints. That's going to be proprioception, tactile senses, temperature, pain, blah, 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 blah. Right, that's going to be somatic sensory. That's the stuff that you notice. Right, the visceral sensory nuclei are going to get information from your viscera, and that's also going to include blood vessels. Okay, so stretch in the viscera. Also, if you have low blood oxygen levels, that information is going to be detected in the blood vessels right, through what we call chemoreceptors, and they're going to transmit that information up to your central nervous system through visceral sensory nuclei. Right? And the motor nuclei, it's somatic, that's an easy one. Okay? Somatic means we have conscious voluntary control. So that's going to be the anterior portion, and it's going to innervate skeletal muscle. Okay? Autonomic, that's autopilot. We don't have any control over that. That's going to be in the lateral horn, and that's going to be our smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and gland tissue. Okay? That's what we see in this picture. Yeah. Okay? So these colors are telling you blue, I think that's purple, orange, red. Right, that's showing you where the nuclei are. Okay, so right as we get into the posterior horn here, right, you got your somatic sensory, right? In the more anterior portion of the posterior horn, that's going to be your visceral sensory nuclei are going to be located there. And in this yellowish orangish region where the lateral horn resides, that is going to be, right, autonomic or visceral motor nuclei, and then way in the front in the anterior horn, that's going to be somatic motor nuclei. Okay? So back here, wait, I'm jumping ahead. Nope, I am not going to say that yet. I'll just jump the gun. All right, good so far? Not too bad? You guys are troopers. I love it. I love it. All right. Let's talk about white matter, and then I think then I'll finish. Then we'll do some labeling, and then we'll call it a night. Okay. We'll get the tests behind us. All right. So white matter. All right. What is white matter? Easy. Myelinated axons. That's it. That's it. That's it. Okay. So in lecture today, we were talking about these regions of white matter that are located in your spinal cord. And so we have three regions. Okay. We have the posterior funiculus. Okay. And then we have our lateral funiculus, and then we have our anterior funiculus. So the posterior funiculus is in the back here. The lateral funiculus is on either side, here and here. And the anterior funiculus is right here. Okay? So the posterior funiculus sits in between both the great horns. Okay? And so that is going to carry sensory tracts. Right? So this is where we saw, right, the fasciculus cuneatus and the fasciculus gracilis. Okay? And what a fasciculi is just these axon bundles. Right? The lateral funiculus is going to be on either side there, and that is going to contain both sensory and motor tracts, or ascending and descending tracts. And then finally, the anterior funiculus is going to sit in between the two horns of the anterior great horns there, right? And that is going to also contain sensory and motor tracts. Okay? So let me show you a picture or a drawing here of that in a little bit more detail. Oh, I'm so badly wrong. All right. No, 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 no. Fight the urge. Fight the urge. All right. So again, I don't expect you to memorize all this, okay? Because you don't need to know all this. But a couple things you want to know that at least where the funiculi are, all right? The lateral, the posterior, and the anterior funiculi. You do want to know back here, right, in the posterior funiculus, this is where we're going to have, right, our fascicularis gracilis and our fascicularis cuneatus. Right? These are sensory pathways that travel right up the back. Right? And then on the sides here, right, we have our spinal cerebral pathways. Right? That's going to be located here in the lateral funiculus. And then we talked about the anterior lateral pathway, both the lateral spinal thalamic tract and the anterior, right, spinal thalamic tract, both of these. Okay. I wouldn't worry about the rubospinal tract and all that. Okay. I so badly want to talk about more. All right, but we can blow through the rest of this later on. I shouldn't say it like that. Not to diminish the rest of the material, but let's do some labeling, and then we'll cut you loose. There's only 14 things to label. Sound good? I'm sure that your brains are like, thank you. Oh, 16. I lied. I'm sorry. Please, 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 please don't hold that against me. Okay, so let's take out our atlas and let's label the longitudinal view of our spinal cord. First things first, I'll zoom in one. From here, keep that out. All right, here is the spinal cord right here. Okay, so you'll hear me call it the spinal cord proper. What I mean by that is it's a rope. Okay, it's a neuron rope, right, that terminates way down here at L1. Right. So what this is, well, I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see exactly what it is pointing to. That's the spinal cord. And this dark line in the middle of it, that's the central canal. Okay, that's the central canal. You don't have to know that for labeling purposes, but just in case you're wondering, what's that black line, right? That's the central canal that's filled with cerebral spinal fluid. Okay? So the spinal cord, like all good things, has to come to an end. It ends down here. All right, that is the conus medullaris. So right where it comes to an end, right here, okay, looks like a cone. Conus medullaris. And you do want to know that it does end at L1, all right, vertebrae. Let me be specific, the L1 vertebrae. All right, so I didn't mention this because I didn't get to that point in the slideshow. When we have a bunch of nerves kind of clustered together, okay, we call that a plexus. Okay, so up here in the neck, okay, you've got a clustering of nerves, right? If it's up in the neck, we refer to that as the cervical plexus. Does anyone happen to know what these muscles are right here? Those are the scalenes. Okay, this is the scalene muscle. That's right. Very good. Good job, Tara. All right. Well, anyways, on the cervical plexus here, you'll see this one nerve here that sits on the anterior scalene. All right, that's called the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve innervates your diaphragm. Okay. So if your anterior scalene goes into muscle spasm, it can give you the hiccups. So, have you ever, what are some of the ways that you can get rid of hiccups? Yeah. Hold your breath, put a bag over your head with a zip tie. No, I'm sorry, that's something else. No, I'm just kidding. Punch somebody in the neck. No, I told that to a class one time. Punch somebody in the neck, that's where the phrenic nerve is. But what can happen is the anterior scalene can go into muscle spasm, all right, and it can irritate that phrenic nerve and cause hiccups. What do? You know what? I haven't tried everything that I said, but I mean, the holding the breath. I don't know. I mean, I just ride it out.
The only thing that really seems like it worked was drinking water upside down, because I've gotten taught that from my
I've heard that.
teacher. Taught me that.
Really?
I was like, yeah, it's really weird, but if you eat, it stops. Really? Yeah.
Really? Oh, you? How about waterboarding? That works.
No.
I just thought of that when you said that you're going to be upside down. I'm like, well, that's kind of close to waterboarding. Yeah. A spoonful of peanut butter makes the. Yes. All right. Here we go. All right. The next slide here. Remember what I said? A group of nerves called a plexus. So this is the brachial plexus. So this is the group of nerves that goes out to your upper extremity. Okay. That's the brachial plexus. All these nerves here. All right, now we're going to get down into the ribs. So when we see a nerve that runs along a rib, we call that an intercostal nerve. And intercostal nerves are paired nerves, so you should have 12 of them because you have 12 ribs. All right. All right. Let's jump down into the lumbar region. So you can see, slide this over. Okay, so we're in the lumbar spine, and I know this because the ribs are superior. Here's the iliac crest. Right, so all these nerves here in the lumbar region are referred to as the lumbar plexus. All right, so we drop down a little bit further. You're going to see this big mama jamba nerve right here. This is going to go to your leg. That is the femoral nerve. Remember the band? Femoral vein, artery, and nerve. Okay, so this is it before it exits out of the pelvis. All right, that's the femoral nerve. All right, and then we got one more plexus group, and that's going to be down by your sacrum. All right, and that's down in here. Here's the coccyx. It's above the coccyx. It includes some of this, but it's all this stuff right here. That's the sacral plexus. All right. So where your spinal cord actually terminates, we call that the conus medullaris, but then we still have those rootlets, and you can see them hanging down here. All these are just rootlets here. All right, and that is what we refer to as the cauda equina. I was telling you how the pia mater, okay, directly adheres onto the spinal cord, okay? And down at the terminal end of the spinal cord, the pia mater forms this long strand that attaches onto the coccyx. It helps to anchor the spinal cord to the coccyx, and that's this. Well, let me zoom in. Let's see a little better. All right, that's this guy right here, out all the way down. All right, that's the phylum terminale. Oops, there we go. Phylum terminale. All right, and then we're going to shoot back up to the neck, and we're going to look at, all right, these structures right here, these pink structures. There's a big one here, then a big one down here, and then there's a smaller one in between. All right, those pink structures are the cervical ganglia. Okay, so obviously this top one here, the largest one, is the superior cervical ganglia. The one that's down at the bottom or the base of your neck, that's the inferior cervical ganglia. And then the smallest one in between, that's the middle cervical ganglia. Okay? I know. Tell me about it. Oh, wait, you just did. Wait a minute, you just did. All right. Does anyone know what part of the brain this is right here? This is actually the front. Yeah, this is the pons. That's the brain stem. So here's the pons. Here's the medulla oblongata right here. Okay, and then you can't really see it, but up here is the midbrain. Yeah, I know. No, I know. No, I like to point it out though, just in case you want to know. Okay, and then last but not least, okay, on either side of your spinal cord, outside of the vertebral column, is this structure right here called the sympathetic chain or trunk. And that's this whole structure right here. Okay? It's called, we'll talk more about that later on. Right? But just know this sits outside your spine, your vertebral column. Okay, but it's parallel to the spinal cord. You have one on the right and one on the left. It's on both sides. All right. Listen, y'all. Good luck for those of you who haven't taken the test. I'll let you guys go out a little bit early because I know you still have to take the test. I beat you up pretty